So yes, as Maxine was saying, this is chapter 4 of Ruth. This is our fourth message in this series of going through. If you've missed any out, I highly recommend you go back and find some of those other talks to fill in the gaps in the picture if you've missed any weeks out. So Ruth is a 4-chapter book, and we're on the 4th chapter. The intention is over then the following, I think we're doing another 3 sessions. Don't quote me on that. And we're going to go back and we're going to pull on some other threads that run through the story of Luke and follow them through ones we haven't chased through. But today we're going to be focusing on chapter 4. You will need your Bibles out if you have them or have them on your phone. Turn to Ruth and we'll be jumping into that in just a moment but before then we're going to look at some other bits. So the book of Ruth explores looking at the relationship between God's purpose and our human decisions. That's the ultimate story that runs through, the ultimate thread that runs through the entire book is weaving together the relationship between God's purpose and human decisions. God weaves together the faithful obedience of the Israelites, that's his people, and that's intertwined with God restoring his world and setting up his rescue plan. And that is kind of the thread that runs through and goes out the other side. And that's kind of where we're going to be following today. As we're getting to the end of chapter 4, it kind of wraps up the story and it sets it on a trajectory out of the book of Ruth. And the key themes we'll be looking at are doing right in the eyes of God. And we're going to be looking at some kindness and some kinship running through. And I've been the title of this, God's Faithfulness, because there's so many titles I could have given it, and that's why I felt we'll give it for this one. But a quick tangent, just to help anyone who isn't aware of the biblical family tree, because this becomes really important as we go through. We're going to look at some names that are going to come up in today's story. And we're going to start with Israel. Israel is not just a modern day country in the region of the Middle East. It's not just a nation. If we look back to Genesis, we see this name Israel springing out of the pages of Genesis 32. And that's where Jacob, who is father of Joseph, that same Joseph that Andrew Lloyd Webber likes to sing about with his coat of many colors. It's Jacob who we find wrestling all night with a stranger who's later identified as God or as an angel. And in that struggle, he gets renamed he gets given a new name, Israel, which means struggles with God. And so with that new name, begins the birth of that people group, the Israelites. And it's the name that God uses to describe his people. That continues all the way through the pages of Scripture, all the way through into the New Testament. We constantly come back to the Israelites. And we're going to have a look at the family tree of Abraham to plot this. So above, we have Abraham right at the very top there we go. Abraham is right at the very top up there, who appears in Genesis. And Abraham's given this promise by God. We've just been singing about promises, haven't we? We're being given this promise by God that he's going to be the father of many nations, with descendants as numerous as the stars and sand on the seashore. The humor being that he's given this promise to a man and his wife, age 75. If you are 75 or over, do you want to just slowly raise your hand? The idea of suddenly having descendants as many as the sands suddenly becomes a bit more daunting. And then we find out that his wife Sarah has been unable to give birth to children her entire life. So this promise had been given to this barren lady and this man. And I mean, they're like, what? But God works a miracle, and this family begins 25 years later. And this family, this blessing gets passed down. You can see Abraham and Sarah, and it gets passed down. You can see the family line coming down here, and it shoots off the bottom of the page. And God begins to work a miracle in his people. And that blessing is passed down from generation to generation. Have you heard of the 12 tribes of Israel? Well, you probably have now if you're looking at the screen. if we look below Jacob here, so this is Jacob who wrestles with God and gets renamed Israel. He has 12 sons. And those 12 sons, you can see, have 12 names, and those names are names of the tribes of Israel. And each of those descendant paths that come from Gad or Reuben or Levi, Judah, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, all of these are tribes of Israel. Most commonly, we hear the tribe of Judah. That's it's Jesus' family tree, the line of Judah. We hear about King David being part of that family tree that comes down. And we're going to be chasing that family tree, this one coming from Judah today. But you also have, running into the New Testament, the tribe of Levi and the tribe of Benjamin. So there we go, Benjamin. So those are the three tribes that continue into the New Testament, whereas the other 10 are lost and they're scattered shortly after the story of Ruth, actually, a few generations later, where the kingdoms divide. You get the divided kings with the north and the south, and there are 10 tribes that are then lost to the pages of Scripture as we get towards the end of the Old Testament. But we're going to be sticking with this path here, this path of the tribe of Judah. And in this picture, we can also see a few names that we're going to come back to today. You've got Leah and you've got Rachel. These are two wives of Jacob, and you can see who their sons are. And we're also going to be looking at Tamar. Those are three names who are going to come up a bit later on in Scripture, but I wanted to point them out here so you can see as we come up. So Ruth is kind of like here. Ruth and Naomi are kind of here, a few generations down the page, but we'll be looking back at those later. But on with the book of Ruth for now. She is our protagonist in this series, and we're going to just catch up with the story, just to set the scene for those that haven't read chapters 1 through 3 so far. So when Naomi and Ruth at the tail end of chapter 1 arrive back in Judah, Bethlehem, they have nothing. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, has died, as have her two sons. Ruth is missing her husband, who's also passed away. Naomi's hope for Ruth has always been that she will remarry and find rest, find security in having a husband. We read that in Ruth 1:9 about her wish is that she'll remarry, that she'll have rest and she'll have security in having a husband. Ruth wants Naomi to have an heir. Ruth wants Naomi to have an heir, a husband and sons. She's lost that male lineage on her side of the family tree. But Ruth is wanting to stand there beside her and continue that journey and provide for her. So after they return back to Judah, after 2 months of gleaning in the fields, that's taking bits of the spare harvest, an honorable landowner named Boaz appears on the scene in chapter 2. And both women think they see a solution. Dan and Mike did a great job of unpacking that over the last few weeks. And so I'm not going to dwell on that. You can go back and re-listen to their messages. Dan, who last spoke, left off with Ruth having proposed to Boaz. So this is the tail end of chapter 3, having proposed to Boaz just as Naomi wished her to. Yet she boldly asked for a unique condition that was added in. I don't know if you noticed that Boaz was to buy Naomi's land and to give her an heir. So Ruth is there just as much beside Naomi as Naomi is there beside Ruth. Boaz was aware. Boaz was in awe of Ruth already. Like he could see a strong woman there who was bold. She had forsaken her people, the Moabites, her family, her identity, and her gods to take care of Naomi, to adopt the God of Israel, Yahweh, as her God. And she had come. And she'd come to support Naomi. She had forsaken her own chance to marry a younger man for the sake of Naomi's comfort and honor. And Boaz readily agrees these conditions. So as we enter chapter 4, we encounter a hurdle. And we know that from everything in the story so far, that Boaz is an upright gentleman. He's been doing things the right way. He's been looking after Ruth. He's not been taking advantage of her. He's been laying a protective hand on her and has not kind of like, as we read through the scriptures of the Old Testament, done the wrong thing and gone, there's a woman I want, I'm just going to take her. Actually, no, he's done the right thing, and he's been guarding her and being a gentleman. Boaz must settle he's been doing the right things also in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the laws of the land. But first, Boaz must settle things with another relative. So we're going to read together Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through to 12. Boaz went to the town gate and took a seat there. Just then, a family redeemer he mentioned came by. So Boaz called out to him, "Come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you." So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders of the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. And Boaz said to the family redeemer, "You know Naomi, who came back from Moab. She is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it, so that you can redeem it if you wish. And if you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I'm next in line to redeem it after you." The man replied, "All right, I'll redeem it." Then Boaz told him, Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family." "Then I can't redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land. I cannot do it." Now, in those days, it was custom in Israel for anyone transferring a right of purchase to remove his sandal and hand it to the other party. This publicly validated the transaction. So the other family redeemer drew off his sandal as he said to Boaz, "You buy the land." Then Boaz said to the elders and the crowd standing around, "You are witnesses that today I have brought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilon, and Mahlon." Those were the two sons of Naomi. "And with the land I've acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and inherit the family property here in this hometown. You're witnesses today." Then the elders and the people the elders and all the people standing in the gate replied, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, from all whom the nation of Israel descended. May you prosper in Euphrates and be famous in Bethlehem. And may the Lord give you descendants by this young woman who will be like our ancestor Perez, and the son of Tamar and Judah." So Dan was talking a couple of weeks ago about there being another family redeemer, a family redeemer being a biblical man, a family member who is next in line to support someone who was lost, who's been made a widow, and is there to support someone who's needing help ultimately. And there was another family redeemer apart from Boaz. So Boaz was a relative of somewhat to Naomi and to Ruth. But there was another family redeemer, one that was closer in relationship, and so was the next legal person entitled to provide an heir for Naomi, to provide for her in all that she needed. And Boaz wanted to do the right thing. So he went to the city gate, which is where he waits for the man to pass by. He then asked him to sit down. This is where the town elders rule on and witness about business and legal transactions. And there in verse 4, Boaz offers the land. The man quickly agrees. There's a lot of nuance in verses 4 and 5 with a lot of legal consequences, and the latter being that the family redeemer, if the man is honorable, would marry Naomi's daughter-in-law and give Ruth, and give Naomi and Elimelech, who was Naomi's late husband, an heir to the estate. So allow that family lineage to continue on. The thing is, when Boaz challenges this other family redeemer to marry Ruth, this Moabite woman who came in and give up that land for another man's inheritance, he doubts. And I'm sure we all know why from unpacking the story over the last few weeks. The Moabites and the Israelites didn't get along, so this alien, the stranger in that foreign land, wouldn't have had those same rights, wouldn't have been looked upon in the same way as an Israelite woman. And in fact, by some of their laws, it forbids them to have relationships together. So this other family redeemer kind of like goes, well, that's risky. It's also been the first year after a famine has ended, and to then acquire some land, to then have to then pass it on again to that family line would have also created more risk, and him marrying and creating a family line with Ruth, a Moabite woman, would potentially bring disrepute for the family. So Boaz and the closer relative complete that legal transaction, and the man officially withdraws his claim, in which case Boaz can stand forward. He's doing the right thing every step of the way here. He's doing right by God. He's doing right by Ruth. He's doing right by Naomi, and he wants the best for those two amazing women. Boaz is not only being a gentleman, but proceeding the right way. He's doing right by the eyes of God. He's being an honorable person. And he's acting on Naomi's behalf here. You can see her speaking on Naomi's behalf, who's unable to complete those transactions herself. In fact, it's strange that she's even in a position where she owns land, because again, historically, going back in 1,000 years BC, for a woman wasn't able to own land herself. It would have been the man's estate. So Boaz is acting on her behalf, is being that person for her. So the elders and the people gathered to watch the proceedings swear by their witnesses. They bless Boaz and Ruth and their future children, and they are impressed with Ruth's kind heart and Boaz's honourable behaviour. And now our little crash course in Israelite history comes into play. The crowd compares them to some amazing people from the past that are who are part of that family tree of Israel, who they look back and go, these are people we identify as pillars in our church family, as pillars in our relationship with God. And they mentioned Rachel and Leah and Tamar, and to be honored in such a way would have made them blush, would have made Boaz and Ruth and Naomi blush, to be kind of like honored in such a way. And they've been compared to the patriarch, the founding fathers, and this is the highest honor that really an Israelite could receive, saying, you're like, I wish you to be like one of them, or you're like one of them. Hence, when we jump forward into the New Testament and Jesus compares himself to Abraham or to Moses in front of the Pharisees, that's why it's received so negatively and almost blasphemy in their eyes that Jesus would compare himself to members of the patriarch, bearing in mind Moses is somewhere off this way. So yes, let's continue reading through chapter 4, and we'll continue from verse 13, just a few more verses. So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. The women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast. She cared for him as if he were her own. the neighbor woman said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again." They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. And this is the genealogical record of their ancestry. And I'm going to pause there. We'll have a look at that in just a second. So in chapter 4, all the story comes together. It concludes with a total reverse of the tragedies from chapter 1 that Ruth and Naomi experienced. The having to leave their land because of a famine, the death of their sons and their husbands are reversed, and Ruth is married again and gives birth to a new son, granting joy to her and Naomi. And this symmetry becomes even more remarkable when compared to the opening tragedy, because you can see that the act of Ruth's loyalty is matched by Boaz's act of loyalty. We saw Ruth saying, "I'll go where you go. I'll stay where you stay. I'm going to leave my land, my people, my Moabite traditions, and I'm going to go with you." And you see that symmetry happening with Boaz's act of loyalty, doing something that he wasn't called to. He wasn't the family redeemer. He wasn't the person that needed to, but he wanted to. He wanted to do the right thing. And you could see that all the way through chapters 2 and 3, doing the right thing, protecting Naomi, protecting Ruth, providing for them. This is a kind of like a final restoration that ties us together. And you can see beautifully that Naomi's demeanor also changes here from chapter 1, from her return from Bethlehem, where she says to other people around her, don't call me Naomi, but call me Mara. Naomi's meaning, when you look at it, is pleasant, whereas Mara means bitter. Naomi saying, "I went away full, but the Lord has caused me to suffer." And then in contrast, in chapter 4, we see Naomi's redemptive arc through Ruth and through Boaz. And we can see God's blessing poured over Naomi, providing that son that she needed, that family member, which means that she had everything that she needed. It was a completion. God fixed what was broken. The story is beautifully written. In this, it's a literal design. It's come through in literacy here. It's actually connecting with an interesting story. There's an interesting feature to this story about how little God is mentioned. Let's go there. So, very few times is God mentioned in this book of Ruth. You hear the characters mention God a few times by Lord or all sorts of different things, or other people saying, God has provided for you again, or things like that. So it does come up, but it hardly ever explicitly mentions what God is doing through this story. And I find that kind of like really subtle and really brilliant, because God's providence is at work behind every scene. I remember at the very beginning I said that this book is like a screenplay, and each chapter goes through a bit more of the story and unpacks with a bit of conversation, a bit more doing, and then a completion. And you can see God at work behind every scene, weaving the entire narrative together. All the character arcs and all the lines and everything comes together through God's work. While Naomi's tragedy leads to her thinking that God is punishing her, we discover actually God's on a mission to restore her. That was God's design all the way through. God accomplishes that restoration through Ruth's boldness and loyalty. And that's the reason why Ruth's action brings healing to her and Naomi's life, because of Boaz. He was a person who was full of love and generosity. We need to remind ourselves as we start to wrap up this chapter why this book was written in the first place. It was written by Samuel. And it was written to remind the audience of King David's rich ancestry, which is with God. It's connected to Israel's family tree. And the passage ends here from verse 18 onwards with a family tree through to David himself. You can see it starts with Perez, which is where we just about finish off, just about here. And you can see that family tree continuing on all the way through to David. That's the reason why the book was originally written, was to connect in, to jump from the judges to the kings and to connect David's lineage, his to God's family. And the thing is, the story about Ruth is primarily about God's faithfulness to Naomi, but this image is expanded to show God's faithfulness to Israel. It's like a little story within the big story. You can expand this out and go, actually, you could see God at work through that family, through Ruth and Naomi, all the way through and out the other side, and he provided, he was there. And you expand it out, and you can see through the Old Testament, God at hand, God at work through that family tree, going through, supporting God's faithfulness to provide. And God was faithful to provide Ruth and Naomi, or Ruth with a son, Naomi with a son-in-law, just in the same way that God was faithful to provide Israel with a king, to provide Israel with King David, which jumps out at the end in verse 22 there. And all of a sudden, this seemingly mundane 4-chapter book thrown in the middle of the Old Testament is such a powerful and important story. Every part of that had a piece to play in this big picture. And it's all to do with God's grand story. And we can see then, I won't do it again, we did it at the end of the first talk, when we jump into Matthew, we jump into Luke, and we follow that Jesus family tree. You can go back through and find that, while Ruth is here, Jesus is somewhere down here in the family tree, that he's part of that same family tree. He's part of that same story. And that small story of Ruth is part of that big story, God's purpose. And Ruth invites us to consider, how might God be at work in our own lives? How are we, like Ruth and Naomi, feeling like we've got a small part in the story and that our small part really, really matters? Sometimes we might feel like our story feels like a drop in the ocean. It's seemingly mundane, it's not needed, it's unnecessary, unwanted. But we are just like Ruth and Naomi. They didn't realize it at the time. Ruth didn't realize at the time that she was being drawn in. She chose to step into this family tree. Naomi didn't realize where she was in this amazing story that she stepped into and was part of. And it's only when you point out and look up, you can go, oh, wow. You're saying, you're wishing for me to be like a Leah and a Rachel and have that blessing. And I'm part of this incredible lineage and this incredible story arc. But it continues on, and that story arc gets even greater. So to suddenly notice where you are by looking backwards, it's really special. You can go, actually, I have a part to play. But then you don't know what a difference that Ruth never knew, and what a difference that she made when she said yes to God, what difference she's making in this Jesus line. And it's because Ruth said yes to saying, I want to be part of God's people, that she got tied into this incredible story of Jesus and became part of what's going on. And we can be the same. We can sometimes feel like we're just a little piece and we're not even put in the puzzle yet. But I'm inviting you to consider, what would it look like if you see yourself as part of the picture? God cares about every season we're in. We could see that even through this small story, Ruth and Naomi went through so many different chapters in their story. They went through times of unknown traveling out of the country because of famine and traveling into an unknown place. They went through times of mourning and of loss. They went through times of feeling desolate and alone. They went through times of returning to God. They went through times of God's provision and feeling loved and blessed and full. And maybe we can spend some time considering what part of this Ruth and Naomi story do we feel ourselves lining up with at this moment. But also, let's consider that all of those bits of the story, no matter whether Ruth was stepping towards God or Naomi was feeling bitter, or whether they were gleaning in the fields, or whether they were under Boaz's protection, or they were blessed with the son, all of that was important. It was all an important part of the story. Now, we were singing earlier, I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you and you alone, and I will not be shaken. And I believe that Ruth was able to sing that. She said yes to God, and she was singing that as she was saying, I will go where you go. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. That was her way of singing what we were just singing half an hour ago. Are we able to sing that as well? Are we able to say, I will put my faith on this rock. I will put my foundations in you, Jesus. I will follow you wherever you lead me. And they didn't know where God was leading them, but they trusted and they pursued God anyway. And they followed faithfully, and God provided. God took them through from a time of hardship through a time of being blessed. And our life is a roller coaster. We'll always go through that, and we're always going to be in this room. There's going to be people here, and on the whole roller coaster. And some of us are at the top. Some of us are feeling like we're at rock bottom at the moment. And if you're in that place, we'd love to pray with you. And actually, sometimes it's the people that are feeling at the top, who are feeling most spiritually full, who are the ones doing the championing and the praying and the supporting and the cuddling and the leading and the guiding and the pointing back towards God and seeing actually we're all part of this. But our lives matter, and we have a part to play, and we are part of God's story. So let's respond. Let's spend some time in worship. Let's spend some time praying. We'd love to pray with you. If you're looking for some prayer, I'd love to pray with you. You can also go and see our lovely prayer team over at the back there if you're looking for a bit more of a quiet space. I'm going to pass back over to Maxine and maybe the band, whatever heading into next. But let's just look at this Ruth story and say, where does my story fit in with what's going on at the moment? And where am I making a choice to be with God? Where am I making a choice, recognizing that I don't have a mundane story, that my story really matters?